Hello, everyone. This is not Britain's Hangout Hour, unfortunately. But today, I am joined with Philip Chase, well known professor, booktuber, and author. We're going to be talking about the second book of his Edan trilogy, The Prophet of Edan. Here's my copy. And there's Philip's copy. Whoa! Um, one of my friends. I was talking about this book, and one of my friends was like, she kind of looks like Katara from Avatar: The Last Airbender. I don't know if you've ever
Oh,
watched that, but I thought that was kind of
I,
funny.
I've seen episodes. I haven't watched the whole thing, but my daughters are fans of that, so I have seen random episodes over the years. Yeah,
Um, but yeah, no, we're talking about Prophet of Edan because I thought it'd be fun to talk to the horse's mouth about uh the Prophet of the Edan books. So I'm glad we got this together.
sure.
Um,
Thank you, Britton. I really appreciate you inviting me. It's always a pleasure to chat with you.
likewise. Yeah, we're talking about the second book today, Prophet of Edan, and uh, but yeah, no, it's I'm sure there's gonna be a lot to talk about. Well, there will be a lot to talk about, but um, yeah. So I should note this will be a spoiler chat, so go read the book, then come back and before you watch the whole thing. But yeah, so Prophet of Edan is the second book of the Edan trilogy. This is the one I call the war book because it's
Sure,
basically the
that's
big
fair.
the big conflict.
Hmm.
Um, and yeah, so Prophet of Edan, how you doing, man? How you been?
I'm doing well. Yeah, I think that's fair to call it the war book. I think
I try. I'll try not. I know it's not that simple, but I'm trying to keep it succinct
yeah,
for the audience here.
sure. Yeah, no, I tried to do something a little different with the trilogy as a whole, in that Prophet of Edan probably ends where a lot of traditional fantasy trilogies would end. And I have
Oh yeah,
another whole
I'm
book.
sure we'll talk about that.
But
So
not that there's no conflict in book three, but um, this one is unusual, maybe, in that I think it does feel like a traditional ending at the end of the Prophet of Edan. But we'll talk about that as you say.
But yes, the Prophet of Edan is the second book of the Edan trilogy that you wrote. You put out
Mhm.
last year.
Yep.
I will give some background. It was a little bit of a journey to get to this point because I was gonna read this in June, accidentally bought Return to Edan by mistake. Um, and I was like, well, that was unfortunate. But I ended up
Yeah.
getting Prophet of Edan, and I read it in July. So there we go.
That
Um,
works. And in future, Britain can thank past Britain for buying Return to Edan in advance.
and I'm hoping to read Return of Edan next month. So hopefully
Cool.
that will work out. And I don't, though I'll admit, I don't know when we'll end up getting around to talking about that because Halloween or October is generally when I do all my horror stuff. So
Ah,
we'll
okay.
see how
Well,
it goes.
whenever you're ready,
But
I'm ready.
but I don't want to get ahead of myself.
Yeah.
Um, I'll admit, when I was kind of coming from a book hangover from Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell when I was reading this book, so it kind of took me a minute to kind of get situated back into the world and the characters of Edan. Oh, oh, sorry.
Got a little hiccup there. Yeah.
Did you hear what I said?
It took you a little bit while to get situated back in the world, I
Oh,
think is
okay.
what. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, I mean, not it's not because like you wrote it badly or anything. It's just it's been a couple months since I read the Wavy Dan, so
Sure.
hopefully it'll give me some wiggle room there.
I'm happy to. I mean, look, the fact of the matter is, when you write a book and you allow someone else to read it, at the point when the other person is reading the book, it's kind of out of your hands. So, that person brings their own experiences to that reading journey. And really, what happens within your brain as you're reading is that's where the story's coming alive, really.
Mm-hmm.
So, you bring your circumstances, your experiences, everything to a particular read. I do my best to try to articulate the vision that I have in here and put it on paper so that you can somehow transfer something like it, I hope, into your brain as you read it. But it's an imperfect process always. So for various reasons, sometimes it's partly the authors. In fact, I think every author fails to deliver that vision that they have. There's no way you can write a perfect book that will perfectly get across what you're envisioning. So the authors fail. You just try to fail better every time. And readers are, as I said, you could be having a book hangover, or you could be trying to read when you're too tired, or you could be, maybe it's not your jam. There's so many factors that come into play. But hopefully, at the end of the day, something happens within that reader's brain that resonates with the author's original vision. So, yeah.
Yeah, I thought this was interesting because again, this is kind of the war book, so
Mhm. It's got a lot of conflict.
there's a lot of
Yeah.
conflict, yes, and
Yeah.
again, I was particularly interested with how it ended, but again, I don't want to get ahead of
Yeah.
myself.
Sure.
Um, but yeah, I mean, there's a lot going on in this book. From There's a lot going
Yeah.
on. So we meet the sort of barbarian tribes. I kind of got a, I don't know. I know you've read Abercrombie, but I got some Abercrombie vibes
Oh, cool.
from the thank Kitty. Thank you for
That's a tail of a cat, by the way, everyone.
yes, yes.
There's the rest of the
Get
cat.
get over here. She's like,
Yeah.
pay attention to me, human.
Yeah. No,
Um.
she's the empress in this conversation. So yeah.
So there's a barbarian clan.
Yes.
In the isn't it called the Wildlands?
Yes, that's what other people call the place where the folk of the tribes live. They
There
don't
is
call it that, but yeah.
there
Yeah.
is one of them who is a member of one of the tribes that kind of got wiped out because of
Yeah.
slavery that was practiced by the names are kind of blanking again. My brain's a little
Okay.
short circuity right now because I woke up
No
earlier.
problem. The Sildari, although various kingdoms practice slavery in this world, a couple do not, but it's not. It doesn't. It's interesting because if you look at the institution of slavery over the course of human history, it's not monolithic.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, today we feel that any form of slavery is bad, but for most of human existence, in most places, but not all, slavery in one form or another has existed. So you do have a couple varieties, I suppose you could call it, of some sort or other, where slavery in some of these cultures is more of a look, you get into debt and you can't pay it back, so you have to become someone's thrall or slave or property, and you can buy your way out of that. So it's not a
Mm-hmm.
permanent condition necessarily. It's not an inherited condition
So
necessarily.
kind
It's
of,
not
I don't mean
as
to
rigid an
interrupt. Oh,
institution. When we think of slavery, we think of that rigid institution that existed in the 19th century
mm-hmm.
in America. It's not always that's the same as that. So yeah, what
So
was your
like
question?
it's kind of, so you're thinking kind of like Roman version of slavery where it was kind of, it's basically what we would call indentured servitude nowadays.
Which is a version of slavery too, you could say. But yeah, yeah. I mean, in the culture that, let's say, Dayraven is from, the Mark,
Mm-hmm.
that's what really it is. It's a more of an indentured servitude. It is something you can buy your way out of. Although there are people who are bought and owned, but again, it's not necessarily a permanent condition. It is hardened somewhat in the culture where Munzil, you're talking about Munzil,
Mm-hmm.
the Ilarkai, or the last of the Gray Wolves. That's his tribe. And his tribe, as you said, was wiped out partly because of rival tribes
Mm-hmm.
in the wildlands, but also because they were sold. The remnants of them were sold off in slavery in the kingdom of Sildaran, which is a different culture. It's a different people. and the condition of slavery has hardened into more of an institution in Sildaran. And a cruel one at that,
Mm-hmm.
which is interesting, I think, because Sildaran is opposed to Torland, which is the main aggressor, if you will, in the trilogy. So it's kind of like, it's not necessarily a case of good guys and bad guys here. The cultures that are opposed to.
I took it more as like a culture clash because again, this is
Uh
kind of
huh.
a. I mean, I haven't read R. Scott Baker's work, but I know his work is
Oh,
about a religious war,
true.
and
His
I'm
that yeah,
and
his first trilogy is very much modeled on the First Crusade. Yeah.
this trilogy anyway, this book anyway, that I've only read two of them so far, but
Oh,
the Prophet of Edan is more of a well, it's about a religious war and that kind of cultural incomprehensibility thing
yep,
that that is
that's true.
explored.
Yeah,
Um,
you're absolutely right.
and
I mean, that's the backdrop. Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot going on though. Bledla is continuing his all-consuming crusade of
Yeah.
spreading the way to anyone who will listen.
Yep.
Or if not, he'll just kill them.
Yep.
The king is in on it, but he's just a megalomaniacal, crazy person who just wants power for himself.
Yeah.
There's also Day Raven and his and the Funky Bunch, as I like to say. Uh,
Yeah.
they're they're trying to put a stop to that, and Day Raven's trying to figure out his elf power thing that he's
Yep.
got going on. So there's a lot going on here.
Hmm. Yeah. I mean, and hopefully you see all these things converge toward the end of the book and work together in ways that are slightly interesting and or novel. But yeah, that's a good summary, I would say. Yeah.
I'll admit, I wasn't entirely sure if cause I was reading this and I was kind of like, okay, yeah, I'm vibing with this, but I wasn't sure, cause I have book three. It's a chunky boy,
Yeah.
so I wasn't sure if you were gonna drag this war out over for the two books, or if you were just gonna do it in this book. So, cause I had heard conflicting things from other
Uh-huh.
reviewers.
Well,
Um,
that goes back to what we were talking about in the beginning, the idea that this is somehow a little different in that where a traditional trilogy would have this play out over three books. What I've done in the first book is a setup, and the second
mm,
book is the conflict, and the third book is really the aftermath.
mm-hmm.
Now, that doesn't mean the conflict is entirely over,
Oh,
or
sure, yeah.
there are many threads to be resolved in book three that are related to the conflict. But the main conflict, the War of the Way, is essentially over at the end of this, and then you have the consequences, and that's what I think I'm doing a little different in book three. Is I'm looking at the consequences. I'm looking at the aftermath. I'm looking at the return. You don't just go back to normal after an all-consuming war. The hero doesn't just go home and say, "Well, I'm glad I did that." They're changed, they're transformed, and you rarely see a fantasy series that really examines what happens to this person who gives this big sacrifice
Mm-hmm.
to achieve peace or to achieve the end of a conflict. Let's say what happens after all that, and I think that's something that's worth exploring, and that's what I'm trying to do, and as I hope you'll see in the third book.
Yeah, I thought it was really well done, for the most part. Though there were some chapters I'm like, damn, how long is this? But it, I read I've read the Gentleman Bastard books, and
Uh-huh.
I can deal with long chapters. I mean, I just started Hyperion yesterday, and the first chapter is 103 pages, which is insane. But
Wow. Well, good news for you, Britain. If you decide to keep reading my standalone sequel that I'm working on now, I'm doing a slightly different approach,
mm,
much more streamlined, and the chapters are probably like 3, 4, 5 pages long usually. So yeah.
oh no, it's fine. Like that's kind of I didn't really have too much to gripe about, but I thought maybe we could talk about just kind of the themes, and maybe also, if you don't mind, talk about some comments I actually got in the last discussion of this that we did, because I thought there
Okay.
was some that could be of interest. Well, there's one
Sure.
particularly I thought um, was interesting, but
Yeah.
now and talk about certain characters, of course. But I thought at first we could talk about how you depict war in this.
Uh-huh. Okay.
Um, I know you were, and I mentioned this in sort of, I call them blurb reviews, which is kind of where I just kind of word vomit some thoughts out. I did on Instagram. I know you, or I think, I saw you do a conversation about Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carried. I
Yeah.
haven't read it, but if I remember right, you are quite fond of that book, right?
Yeah, I think Tim O'Brien's very talented, and I appreciate the perspective, the window he offers in his writing. And I know he writes it out of genuine experience. Like is a combat veteran.
Mm-hmm.
He participated in combat during the war in Vietnam, and I feel like I'm somebody who I want to listen to somebody who is sharing that kind of experience
Mm-hmm.
because I have not been in combat. I don't know what it's like. I can only guess. And I think it's important for people, for the vast majority of us in society who don't experience that, to try to understand that, particularly when they're doing something in the name of a nation that I'm part of. I
Mm-hmm.
need to understand what is going on over there. What are they experiencing? How does it affect them? How does it impact them for the rest of their lives? And that's something that Tim O'Brien really helps you understand.
Yeah, well, I just thought it was kind of interesting because there's a paragraph of his that I like. Apparently it's in The Things They Carried. I haven't read it yet. I'm actually hoping to read it in November if I find
Oh,
the time.
good. Yeah. So you mean
Um
the whole book or the short story?
whole book.
Okay.
But there's a line. I won't say the whole thing, but basically the gist is a true war story is never moral, and it's often defined by its uncompromising allegiance to obscenity and evil.
Yeah.
And there's
Yeah.
one of my favorite bits in this book is when you talk about I don't remember the line exactly, but I remember war brings out the worst in people.
Yeah.
I can't remember the line exactly, but I remember that one.
Sure.
And it
Yeah.
kind of reminded me of that line anyway,
Yeah. No, the
though
truth
not
is,
quite as didactic, where he's just
yeah, well, I think the
where
truth
Tim
is,
O'Brien is literally like, "Look, war sucks," and
I mean, he's very honest, isn't
war
he?
stories should suck. Well, not like
I think it's important to be as honest as possible, and that's what I set out to do.
Mm-hmm.
I have not, as again, I think it's important to emphasize, I've not experienced combat. I've never had to point a gun, or I've never even held a gun. So I don't know what that's like. I don't know what it's like to take a life. It's something I hope I never find out. But at the same time, I have tried in every facet of the books to try to be true to real life, to be real experience. I mean, it's a
Mm-hmm.
fantasy. Obviously, we're going to take liberties here and there, but when we're talking about human experience, as a writer, I'm trying to reflect what I think human experience might be. And there are many realms where I know more, and there are some where I have to guess. I have to read. I have to find out from people who have experienced those things what it's like. So I've tried my best, but to learn from authors like Tim O'Brien about combat and what it's like and what people who go through it experience, how they feel. And I've tried to be honest about the violence. I don't. I'm not prescribing that everyone has to like or a certain type of portrayal of violence, or that there should be only one way to do it. But for me, I want it to be as honest and which means as visceral, really, as possible. To not have the characters go through a battle and be unaffected, and then they just go on to the next adventure. I felt like, no, there's got to be some real scar tissue here. There's got to be some real trauma. So there's got to be some, and the moment of conflict itself, it's got to be absolutely. I mean, I hope someone reads it and says, "Oh gosh, this is." this is violent. This is unpleasant. This is, this is gory, because that's, as far as I can tell, my imagination leads me to believe that being in combat is a combination. This is something from Tim O'Brien, actually, since you
Mm,
brought him up. Tim O'Brien, in the short story The Things They Carried, talks about the soldier's greatest fear.
mm,
And it's not the fear of dying, which is, of course, a huge fear. You're carrying that fear around with you all the time. You're afraid
mm,
to die. That everybody's scared of death. But that's not the soldier's greatest fear. The soldier's greatest fear, which is in direct conflict with the fear of dying, is the fear of being a coward, the fear of
mm,
embarrassing yourself, the fear of running away. And that's in direct conflict with that's what keeps you there. Even though you're scared to die, you're there standing beside your comrades, because you're afraid to shame yourself even more than you're afraid to die.
mm.
And carrying that tension around with you all the time, that's something you never get to put down as a soldier. You'd have to learn to live with that. And that is an insight that I think Tim O'Brien gives in his stories. That, and most of my students who have been veterans who have read the story and have talked with me about it have said, "Wow, he really nails it here. This is actually what it's like." Yes, I can tell he went through this. So I've had a lot of confirmation that what O'Brien says there is actually pretty accurate.
Well, I mean, I did want. This kind of leads me to a question because I don't want to assume anything, of course, because I'm sure you've heard the old saying, but I was curious of like touch points you had when you wrote about war
Yeah.
in the Prophet of Edan. I mean, there were a couple I could probably that I sussed out. I definitely felt an Abercrombie influence going back there, but
Uh-huh.
I
Yeah.
wasn't I wasn't but I wanted to hear your thoughts on it.
I'm pleased as can be to hear you say that. The truth is, I actually wrote it before I read anything by Abercrombie,
Ha!
but I
Of
love the
course.
comparison because I think Abercrombie, to me, he's one of the best action writers, and I love his battle scenes in particular because he also is very visceral. He doesn't have scenes of glory and honor and prowess, and he shows the people rolling around in the mud and the muck and the blood and the intestines spilling out and the fear and the he's very honest, in my opinion, in his portrayal of combat. And he also does a thing where he does a lot of head hopping and gives you a sense of the
Mm.
action and the just the pacing of his battle scenes. I think is really brilliantly done. So if I'm anything like that in my portrayal of battle scenes, then hooray! Because that's kind of what I was shooting for. Honestly, is that sense of panic and fear and but also just determination to do right by your comrades if you can possibly keep yourself from shaking apart and that kind of pulse pounding visceral experience. I think Abercrombie's one of the best at getting it across. So yeah, so that's where I'm not trying to glorify war or violence by any means in my descriptions.
Oh, for sure. I didn't get the idea that war was being glorified here. It
Yeah,
was it was
yeah.
it's but I was curious if there were any touchstones, or if, I mean, I'm sure there were, but I just wanted to know what they could have been, or if you were
Well,
even thinking of that specifically when you wrote it.
I probably wasn't thinking too specifically beyond just trying to be as honest as possible. But I'll tell you what I had read before writing. Yeah, and a lot of people pick up from the first book the fact that I'm a huge fan of Tolkien, and
Mm.
that's obvious.
Oh,
And I'm
wow,
also,
really? Oh.
yeah, big fan of Le Guin as well. And there's very little violence in her books. But where maybe I do get some influence, unconscious or even conscious, is George R. R. Martin's
Mm.
A Song of Ice and Fire, where I think his portrayal of violence is also brutal and visceral and shocking,
Mm-hmm.
and all of that. So I probably, and he's not the only one. I mean, there are others prior to him as well, but he's a big influence on that side of fantasy. Some people categorize him as grimdark. I'm fine with that categorization. I'm not going to argue about the terminologies,
Yeah, no.
but it's definitely a more quote unquote realistic portrayal of violence. I think that Martin engages in, and probably that pulled me in a certain direction as I decided to try to tackle this trilogy.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely got like the Tolkien. I'll admit, you could take this with a huge grain of salt. I haven't read the Lord of the Rings in a while.
Uh-huh.
But I do remember that Tolkien. A lot of people think of Tolkien as like oh, the hobbits. We're going on a little journey to put
Right.
the ring down in Mordor. He could get pretty dark too, like
Yeah, I think
sometimes.
more so in the Silmarillion actually than
I
anywhere
have not read
else.
the Silmarillion,
Yeah.
unfortunately, but I do
Yeah,
remember in
no,
the books there were moments I was like, "Geez, it's kind of messed up."
Silmarillion is high tragedy for sure. That has the biggest body count by far of all of Tolkien's work. But I think he's more on the side of not glorifying violence actually, because he's somebody who, speaking of people who actually saw combat, he saw combat in World
Mm-hmm.
War One. He knew very well what it was like, and I think he deliberately did not want to describe battle that way. That was not
Mm-hmm.
what he wanted. He didn't want to relive his experiences in World War One. It was probably too close to the bone for him. So he tends to. I mean, if you look at something like the Battle of Helm's Deep in
Mm-hmm.
the Two Towers, that's a couple pages in the book,
Yeah.
whereas it dominates the second film in the Peter Jackson adaptation. So people think, oh wow, there's all these battles in Lord of the Rings. Well, actually, a lot less than you might think if you've only seen the films. Yeah.
Yeah. No. It's, I don't want to get into Helm's Deep because I could just gush about how great of a battle it is in the movie.
Yeah.
But I do like that you approach the spectrum of people who fight, because there are certain war stories that can get a little too on the war sucks, don't do
Yeah.
this. But
Yeah.
you also acknowledge that there are those strange, crazy people out there who kind of enjoy the experience in a weird way.
Yeah. Well, look,
Um,
there are
Particularly with
people.
the Thorin character. I can't remember his name at the moment, but him and the dwarf are friends.
Oh, Orvendil, and
Orvindil,
yeah,
yes,
yeah. No,
he's the
yeah,
mercenary leader.
yeah. Orvendil is a warrior. He is someone who has devoted his life to combat, and he's very good at it. And I think most people have something that they're really good at and that they enjoy and that they throw themselves into. For me, it's writing. I also love tennis. I love to be in that zone. I love to be in that place. He happens to be, his thing is war and combat, which is probably slightly different in many ways because it's a live or die situation. So
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot more at stake than say a tennis match or something like that. So uh, he never feels more alive than when he's fighting, and that is something that he both lives for, but also is clearly concerned about because he doesn't necessarily want to be a person who is just destructive. That he doesn't want to have, you know, this feeling that, oh man, I never really feel like I'm alive unless I'm killing someone. So I hope that his sort of inner conflict is something that comes across that he's, if in a different book, maybe he would be the hero of this trilogy. He would be a Conan like character. But I've tried to give him a conscience. I've tried to give him a little bit of a conflict where he meets Dayraven and he sees reflected in Dayraven a vision of himself as maybe a better person, maybe as somebody who's not just destructive, but who is also creative in some way. And he wants to live up to that. But at the same time, he really is really good at war. He is really good at fighting, and
Yeah,
that's his thing.
I was kind of reminded of not quite as extreme as this character, but I was kind of reminded of Logan Nine Fingers a little bit,
Sure.
where on the one hand he loves the conflict of war, but he's also kind of ashamed of the fact that he likes it.
Yep. Yep. No, that's a trope, really. That kind of character. And when I use the word trope, by the way, I don't mean it negatively. Just a tool. It can be used well or not well. I think in the case of Logan Nine Fingers, he's one of my favorite examples of that trope. So yeah,
Well, I don't think with Orvindil it's quite as extreme as
I
Logan.
agree. Yeah, I would agree with that. Yeah.
Orvindil has a better control over himself, for sure.
Yes. Yeah, definitely. Like in the case of Logan Nine Fingers, slight spoiler here if you haven't read First Law, I guess, but
Mm-hmm.
they're almost two different people. Logan and the Bloody Nine are almost two different people.
Mm-hmm.
Orvindil is one person,
Uh-huh.
and he's never completely out of control. But you do see a moment, let's say a duel in the midst of a battle here, where for most of the duel he does not want to kill the person he's fighting against, who happens
Mm-hmm.
to be Raven's father.
That was
But
really sad, by the
at
way.
the
Yeah.
last, and
He's
unfortunately,
trying so hard not to kill him.
but that inner beast, that instinct takes over at a certain point, and he does kill Raven's father, and instantly feels awful about it. But it was either that or die.
Mm-hmm. And
So yeah,
Day Raven doesn't take it too personally. I mean, of course he's sad, but
no,
he's like,
yeah,
my dad, he was just doing his duty. I understand.
right, yeah. I mean, that is a sort of a warrior's code.
Which I was
Like,
kind of surprised there wasn't more tension there. I mean, yeah, I get that he didn't really have a choice, but maybe it's just me talking here, but I would be a little miffed that he killed my dad.
Yeah, well, part of that is, as you said, Raven understands what happened as if he had been there witnessing it. He knows that Orvindil tried to do his best not to even fight, let alone kill Raven's father. The other part of it there is Raven has, as a result of giving everything to defeat Bledla, he's essentially he's losing touch with his identity.
Mm-hmm.
He is in a state of not indifference yet, because he's trying his best to hold on to a shred of his humanity, but he's reached a state where he doesn't feel that he is necessarily that individual, that person whose identity was shaped around the memories that Raven had. He's reached a sort of a transcendental state, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And so he's in a place where that kind of attachment affects him less, let's say, than it would you or me,
Mm-hmm.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, I was about to say it's probably just me speaking from 21st century. I mean, I'm sure I would probably get that you didn't want to do it, but I would still be like, eh. I get it basically, but I'm just
Yeah.
saying. Again,
There's
I'm
a whole
probably just
emotional
speaking.
side of you that would still be upset, obviously. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there's also dragons in this, and
Yeah.
they're terrifying.
Good. They
they're
should
not,
be.
they're not they're
This
not
is
just
not
like,
this
look
is
how
not
cool the dragon is. Whoa, it's like, holy crap, these things could destroy the world.
that's what I'm trying to do. It's not Puff the Magic Dragon here, nor
It's
is
not that
it
creepy looking dragon from the never ending story.
not that
Kind
either,
of
not
cute, but also
Aragon.
creepy and off putting.
Yeah. Yeah, this is just my idea about dragons, that they are incredibly intelligent. They have their own kind of intelligence, which is different from human intelligence.
Which I think
Um,
that makes Bloodlaw even scarier because he can
yep,
control them. So
that's
it makes
right.
you wonder, like, holy crap, what can't he do?
It also makes it kind of understandable why Bledla would see himself as Edan's chosen. You know, that, okay, why
Yeah.
else do I have all this power? Obviously, Edan wants me to use it to fulfill his will. Okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to devote my life to achieving the kingdom of the eternal because I've been given this power, and so that's my sacred duty. So he sees himself as the good guy up until the very end.
Yeah, he's. I've heard people say this. I think in some other conversations you've had. So it's kind of it's. I don't wish to repeat that, but I feel it'd be interesting to bring it up. But going to Bloodlaw, I thought it was kind of maybe it was just me, but and I've heard other people say it, and I've heard people say like he becomes a kind of less interesting character than he was in the first book because he's basically just given into his god complex.
Yeah, I
Um,
think he had done his job at this point, and the War of the Way was really his war. And with it ending, it's the end of his arc. He literally dies, at
no,
the
I
end of
mean,
the war.
there were like, I mean, just like in the Way of Edan, there was like moments where he was like, wait a minute, could I
Uh-huh.
not be could I not be the one?
Hmm.
You know,
Yeah,
it makes sense. He kind of he's one of the scariest type of villains. He is utterly
yeah,
convinced what he's doing is right,
yep, yeah.
and
That's
unless you
right.
can convince him somehow that it's Edan's will, sorry, to
That's okay.
not do what he's doing, um,
Right, right.
uh, you're not. You're not changing his mind. You're converting to the way of Edan, or you're dying,
That's right.
often
Yeah,
horribly.
yeah. There is almost nothing scarier than people who think that they are doing the will of God, and anything that gets in their way is damned.
Yeah, I mean,
So
and you see that throughout history, not even just with religious people, but there's also people like Maximilian Robespierre or the
sure.
communists in Russia who were so convinced of the
Yep.
purity of their cause, they were gonna murder or convert they didn't care how much blood they were gonna spill,
I
as long as
totally
they got
agree.
their perfect world. And
Yep. I totally agree.
I
Yep.
thought that was kind of interesting. Though I will admit, I was kind of sad that there wasn't as much of the complexity as there was a little bit in. I mean, he still was the kind of. I don't want to say he was a cackling madman, but he is a
Right.
madman. But or at least
From
I
your
think he was a
perspective
madman.
and my perspective, yes, he
Um.
is. But from his perspective, he's the good guy. Yeah.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, I'm not. I understand. That he thinks that way.
Yeah.
It's but I was kind of I was kind of wishing for more, I guess. I mean, what was your headspace when you were writing Bloodla in this volume?
Well, I'm thinking that Bledla's done his job, and
Hmm.
it's time for someone else to take over, and you're going to see who that is. You probably know already because you read this book,
Mm,
but you're going to see that play out in the third book. So Bledla needed to step aside, in a sense, in order for another character to have his shot, and I think this character, for me anyway, is actually much more interesting overall in his motivations, much more relatable for probably more people. And that character is Yoruman.
mm-hmm.
He
Yes.
becomes the supreme priest. A lot of people would have maybe wanted more of him in book two, but really, I think book three is where you're going to see Yoruman
Yes, he's I
take
find
more
it
of a,
interesting with Yoramon. He's more of a schemer than
yeah,
Bloodla is, cuz the thing about Bloodla is he's totally upfront about what he is, for all of his faults. There's
right.
no duplicitousness in his. I probably
Not
said
a
that
bit.
wrong. I apologize.
No, you said it perfectly. Yeah.
Um, there's no manipulation or like I said, he genuinely thinks he's doing the right thing.
Well, there is a little bit, I would say, in that he does pull some stunts, like having at the very beginning of the first book, you see these
Like I
three
never I
priests.
never imagined him as like a political animal like
Yeah,
Yoramon.
yeah,
I don't think
no,
he has
totally
patience
fair,
for that.
totally fair. Yeah, he's not above manipulation in the sense that if he believes it's Edan's will and it needs to
Uh-huh.
be accomplished, he will do whatever it takes. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
But I didn't really think of him because Yoramon I think more as like a pragmatic,
yeah,
political kind of guy, Well, Bledla, he's the true believer. Like,
I think
he
that's
has
very
no
fair.
patience for the political chicanery.
Yeah. No, I think that's accurate. But Yorman does have a thing, though, that he is passionate about, that he wants to accomplish, and for which he will sacrifice anything. And that is, he wants to defeat mortality.
Mm-hmm.
And he believes that there is that is possible. That using our intelligence, using our wit, using every bit of power at our disposal, there's a way, and he's determined to find it. So.
Yeah, no. He's also sent on a diplomatic mission
Yes,
to the
get him out of the
wildlands.
mischief. Yeah, yeah,
Because Bledla's just Bledla's kind. I don't want to say he's lost his mind, because he was already kind of he was already pretty crazy, or at least by my standards he's pretty crazy. In
yeah.
the first book, but now he's grown paranoid. He doesn't know who to trust. And
Right.
he and of course it makes sense that Yoramon he might think Yoramon he's a little sus, as the kids like to
Yeah,
say.
absolutely. I mean, Bledla's not wrong. You're right. He is paranoid, but he's actually not wrong. Someone was betraying him. It just wasn't Yoramon.
Yeah.
Uh, although Yoramon was betraying him, he just hadn't done it yet. He was in cahoots with King Erkenwald. They had planned to ditch Bledla at a certain point. It happened sooner than they anticipated. But who was actually betraying him was Arna the whole time.
Yeah. 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 Um,
So
I,
yeah, that
I,
was a
I
bit of a
should
shock.
I should get this out of the way, but the other wizard, I'm again
Galdor.
Galdor.
Yeah.
Was it because because he says in the book that he was in love once, with a
Yeah.
man, and I'm like, oh, okay, so this is because I mean, I'll admit, you're probably the one who knows the most. I don't know how homosexuality is viewed in that world,
Right.
but
It is disapproved of, certainly by
was
Blood.
but I kind of came to this, and you could say if I'm right or wrong. Was Arna the one he was talking about?
Of course. Yeah. Yeah.
Ha! I thought it was pretty clear, but I wanted to be sure.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it was Arna, and I think where it's most clear is in the scene when Arna dies, having tried to save Galdor, and Bledla says to Galdor after Arna is dead, "You perverted him." And Galdor says back to him, "No, I loved him." Right.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, so yes, they are. And to answer your question, this is a world and a place where homosexuality is. There are varying degrees of intolerance, let's say,
Mm-hmm.
and with a religion like the Way being in its current, at least incarnation in the present of the story, it's that the Way is led by people who are highly disapproving of who would condemn homosexuality.
Mm-hmm.
That's not to say that there aren't people within the Way who are there are plenty of gay people in who work within the Way and in that culture
I
as
mean,
well.
Dayraven seemed pretty cool with it, so
Yeah,
that's just one
no, I
guy.
think Dayraven is not the type. Dayraven's just not the type to judge people. He's not someone who would get on his high horse and say, "Oh, my way of seeing the world is the only correct and right way." He's somebody who's going
Well,
to,
yeah.
yeah. So, but yeah, I think it's something that largely in other cultures would be in this world I'm talking about. It's something that exists, of course. It is something that is often not talked about, is slightly disapproved of, and with differing degrees. But it's something that is not tolerated within the higher echelon, let's say, of the Way, at least. Yeah.
Indeed. Yeah, that's what I thought, and I mean, it's pretty clear by the sacrifice that, or at least I thought so. They just don't outright say it.
Right.
I guess they kind of do. I don't know.
Yeah.
But Bledla has his whole breakdown where he's like, "Why have you betrayed me? You were my friend." sort of
Sure.
thing.
Yeah.
And Bloodlet
It's
then
also
loses
Bloodless,
whatever
like,
marbles he had left and is
yeah.
promptly murdered.
The thing is, I think Bledla thought of Arna as well as his redemption project. So he was able to take, from his perspective, again, homosexuality bad, right? He saw Galdor as corrupting Arna, and he was able to pull Arna away from Galdor
Mm,
and have him renounce that relationship, and also get Galdor out of the way, and brand him a heretic.
mm,
So for Arna at the end of the day to come back and say, no, actually, I was wrong. This was the best part of myself that I rejected. Uh, and, to protect Galdor in that moment is basically for Arna to spoil that redemption project of Bloodlust. He was thinking all this time, I saved this guy from blasphemy. I saved him from corruption. I made him into my image, someone who thinks like me, and that basically blew up in his face in that moment. And that was a kind of a rude shock for Bledla, right?
I did feel sorry for Arna. He seemed like a guy who was a genuine believer, but at the
Yeah,
same time, like he felt that Bledla was going too far.
yeah. No, he's talk about somebody with
Like
conflict.
he loves like I think on some level he cares about Bledla. He doesn't think
Oh,
like
he
he's an
does.
evil man. He
You're
just thinks
absolutely right.
he's just doing it wrong.
He admires Bledla. He knows that Bledla has all this power, but also this dedication, this unwavering dedication to the way and to Edan. And that is something that he resonates with. But he doesn't agree with using violence to forcibly convert the rest of the world. So he is in deep conflict about that. Yeah.
Yeah, um yeah, he's a good character. There's a lot of some empathy there.
Hmm.
Because
Yeah.
you're
I hope
like
so.
you really admire this man, but you realize like
Right.
he's going too far. But he's too far in. He doesn't know how to you know tell him that maybe you're going a little too far here without him having a breakdown and like ordering him to get tortured or murdered or something.
Yeah, I mean, he's tried. They've had conversations in the past, and he's tried to convince Bledla, and Bledla has essentially overruled him. So yeah,
But I thought it was interesting. There's a little thing by the end where Bledla where Dayraven speculates on Bledla being influenced by the dragons as much as he had control over them, which I
yeah,
thought was quite fascinating.
yeah,
I mean, I don't know if that's just the dragons brought out the worst side of himself that was already there, or if he was changed by the dragons. I thought that was interesting.
yeah, yeah. I think Dayraven's probably right in my mind, at least. I think that Bledla's close contact with the dragons, because yeah, on the one hand, he does dominate them and control them, but you can't be in proximity with something like that and not be influenced as well. And so some of their violence has bled into Bledla, and he is probably more prone to exert his will through violence than he otherwise would have been. Yeah.
Um, for sure, yeah, and he definitely is. Um, it was. I was kind of. Again, I wasn't entirely sure how this book was gonna go down because it was
Yeah.
kind of like I was kind of like, so is he gonna drag it out for another book? Is it just gonna stop here? It stops there. Like the war's over. Like Erkenwald basically does a whole song and dance and murders Bloodla, and they're like, all right, going home, but I'll come back and kill you later. Wink, wink.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think Erkenwald is an idiot, and it's his narcissism that.
Yeah, I mean, Erkenwald, in the last book, I was kind of like, he's a bad guy, but I
Yeah.
kind of respect that he's self-aware about being a bad guy. And this, I'm
And,
like, he's a freaking psychopath. I'm like,
I mean, he
God.
does murder his wife in a fit of rage. He murders his best chance of dominating that continent when he kills Bledla. And it's all out of his own ego, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
about him. Everything's about him and his fragile ego. And yeah, he cannot abide anything that reminds him that he's not the all powerful alpha male that he wants to be, right? So yeah, he's
Well,
kind of a loser, really.
well, I mean, I don't mean to disagree with you. Of course, you wrote
Uh,
you wrote the thing. I mean,
I mean,
I
you
don't know.
can.
You know, Irkenwald. I don't know if I would say he's an idiot. I mean, I definitely think he's short-sighted a lot.
Yes,
But I think he does have some skills. Like he's not
I would
a
agree. Yeah,
complete fool.
he's charismatic.
He's not Joffrey, for instance. Going back
Yes,
to
you're
Game of
right. Yeah,
Thrones.
he's charismatic and he's intelligent enough to manipulate people around him effectively, but at the end of the day, it's his ego that gets in the way of his own best interest.
For
I think.
sure. Yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. Like he's always he's really disdainful of, of Bledla because he's just.
Yeah,
I think a lot of it is he just doesn't comprehend his genuine belief.
he doesn't think it's real. I mean, he thinks it's all BS. Yeah,
But
he's very cynical as well. Yeah,
but at the same time, he's kind of just using him for his own megalomaniacal delusions. So there you
correct,
go.
correct. Yeah, yeah. That's Erkenwald. Yeah,
um, he's very deranged in this book, particularly.
I would say so. And
In
you're
this,
going
I
to
just thought he was kind of a smug megalomaniac. In this, he's kind of like, are there causes of why he's losing his marbles, or is it just his
yeah.
marbles are already gone and we're just, you know?
I think it's a case of be careful what you wish for, because you might get it, And he gets to a point where partly it's him and his insecurities, but it's also the violence that he. So I'm of the belief that you cannot uh, commit violence, and that includes being in a position like him where he's ordering the violence and he has people carrying it out for him. But you cannot commit that kind of violence without it affecting you. And he is essentially a coward. Erkenwald is a
Mm,
coward. He visits a lot of destruction and despair and horrors upon the world, and on some level, that begins to affect him.
I was about to say there's a sense that he knows what he's doing is wrong.
Yes, somewhere deep down in there, he does.
And there's the part where he's making whoopee with his wife before he
or,
murders her.
or failing to.
Uh
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
Um and like he's affected by the memories of the
right,
atrocities. So it's like on
exactly.
some level he does feel some guilt over it.
Yeah, I think he
Though I could
realizes
be
he's.
wrong. Again, you wrote the thing.
Yeah, no, no, he's feeling guilt, but he's also feeling a kind of sick addiction to what he's witnessed. That somehow he feels that see, the thing is, the way I have the way I feel about it is oftentimes people who do horrible things to other people, it's not always about the act itself. It's about the feeling of power that
Mm,
comes along with it.
mm-hmm.
It's that addiction to power that you feel when you control someone else in that way, when you do something horrible to someone else. I'm not going to get too specific here, but I think you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
And the people who do things like that, they feel empowered by that.
Yeah,
And it's
I think like
often people who are
whatever.
actually deep down very insecure, but they want to feel empowered. And so for Erkenwald, it's like a drug. So
Yeah, I was
he,
gonna
he
say like
gets
I feel like there is like a sort of conscience deep in there but
Sure.
it's so like filled with, but he's so like blocked up with like narcissism and spite and just
Yep.
megalomania that like
Yep.
it doesn't really click, you know.
I think that's fair. But he's getting more and more addicted, and on some level, he knows it, to this violence as a way of feeling, oh, I'm in control, and that excites him. That makes him feel, you know, somehow more alive.
I
And
think
yet,
that's why he hates Bloodlust so much, is what I've
yes,
gathered.
because he
Because
knows he's dependent on Bledla, and he
yeah,
doesn't like
because he's like this, you know, Gandalf Saruman looking guy. They don't know Lord of the Rings in this world, but this
that. Right.
Saruman guy thinks he can tell me what to do.
Yeah.
You know, I feel like there's a lot of that.
Sure. Yeah. But I think it's about power and the
Mm-hmm.
feeling of power. And it's all about his ego and his, as you say, he's a megalomaniac. Yeah.
I like it's a distinct term. I feel.
Yep. You could use narcissist too, I think.
Yeah, that's fair. He's definitely very self-involved.
Yep.
Uh,
And for him, other people's pain is less important than his pleasure, and so he's willing.
you know the kind of funny thing. I kept imagining Alan as Erkenwald, like literally
Oh, yeah.
Alan. I don't know. It's just I
Well, he's
imagine he
doing
had
the audiobook.
I
He's doing the
I
audiobook.
imagine he had a lot of fun with that character because I know he's
I
doing the
hope so.
audiobook.
Yeah, I hope so.
Um, but yeah, no, it's definitely a it's he's definitely a I mean I don't know. It's kind of hard. Either he, I would probably say he might be the most evil character in the book in the series so far. It could
I
change
think
as book.
I could agree with that. Yeah.
I mean, it could change as book 3 comes along, but you know, we'll see.
I doubt it. But yeah, who knows? Yeah.
Yeah, like Erkenwald does his whole song and dance, and then is like, "Hey, I'm gonna kill you later. See you later."
Yeah. Yeah. He'll be
Uh,
back. Yeah.
the idea is the war might be over, but the conflict isn't. um,
Yes, that's essentially true.
he
Yeah.
basically does the old "we're gonna blame it all on bloodline" tactic.
Right. Right.
Very Machiavellian, actually. I think in The Prince, if I remember right, he's like, if you screw up, blame the other guy, like blame one of your underlings, and then you know you'll be fine.
Yeah, we still see politicians doing that today. Yeah.
Uh huh. Though a lot of this is also Day Raven's journey to figuring out himself and the, as I like to say, eldritch power that exists within him.
Yeah.
And we learn a lot about the magic of this world. Which,
Yeah.
again, I had just read Jonathan Strange and Mister Norrell, so there was some stuff where I
Uh-huh.
was kind of like, "Huh, that kind of reminds me of that." Because like, there's the send or again, you can say if you can add some details if I'm missing anything, but there's this sense that like kind of like in Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, the more you use magic, the more you lose yourself in it.
Right. 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 Yeah.
At least in Day
Yeah.
Raven's case.
Well, yeah. I mean, he's at a level that is just so unprecedented, and it's because it's not entirely his, right? And there's this it's coming from this outside entity, the elf, that has been somehow embedded in him, and that's kind of a mystery, really, of the trilogy, is why does Dayraven survive his encounter with the elf?
Yeah, why did the elf choose him? Which is
That's the question. Did the elf choose him, or
um, which
did he
is
choose the elf?
which is which is sort of explained when he goes to the I call it the world tree because it's basically
Yeah,
that's what it is.
I like that. Yeah,
It
it is.
reminded me a lot of the world tree
Oh yeah,
in
it's
Norse myth.
very much based on Yggdrasil, but you will get more, I think, clarity on these questions in the third book. Yeah.
Um, there's a lot of he ends up forming a connection with Sequara, which I was kind of like, oh, are they gonna get together? Oh, okay, all right, that
Yeah.
it's developed well enough through the story where I was like, all right, yeah, this is fine.
I hope so. Yeah, I hope it didn't come out of nowhere. I mean, I was
No, I
trying
mean
to.
it's understandable. They had that kind of connection in the first book, and one of the things I like, kind of going back to your, what you were writing about war.
Yeah,
Um, he's still haunted by that guy he killed.
sure.
Um,
Good. Yeah, I
and it's
needed
not,
to
and
go
it's
back to
not
that.
like a it's kind of like you said. It's not like he, gets rid of the bad guys and goes on to another adventure.
Right.
There's like a
Right.
toll still, and he's like, he still feels bad for killing that guy.
Yep, he does. Yeah, and he
Even though
will
it was
always.
in war, they were fighting each other. But it's that's kind of, he's still like, he still remembers it. If I
Yep,
remember right, like there are moments where he like thinks about it and he's like,
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, he is more and more in a state of mind where he perceives that all of life is one, and that what you do to another, you do to yourself. And that by killing someone in that way, yes, it was in the middle of combat. Yes, you could say it was even self-defense, maybe. But that doesn't take away the fact that he took away a life, and there were consequences to that he had felt the full impact of when he sensed
yeah,
that
because not
man's
only does he kill the
dying
guy, he gets a
thoughts.
nice insight into the guy's life and his
Yeah,
family and all that. And he's like,
yep.
oh,
I
oh,
mean,
I feel
it would be
worse
awfully
now.
hard for any soldier to take a life if he knew what the consequences of that action would be, and that who that person's loved ones are, and how they would be affected by that loss. Yeah,
And I mean, you kind of hinted at this earlier, but there's a lot of discussion on identity, and
yeah, yeah,
and we kind of see through this book that Day Raven is slowly kind of shedding his
yeah.
not humanity. I don't know if I want to get that dramatic, but he's kind of again kind of going back to the Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell um, comparison because again,
Sure.
uh, it's like the more he uses, the more he lets himself be, use the elf power. Like the more he loses himself.
Correct. Yeah, that is correct. Yeah,
Like there's even a part where, like at the end, where he's like, where the elf shard basically takes over his identity, and he's
yeah.
all like, well, I guess I'm gonna kill everyone.
So that's his conflict: is how much of myself can I lose and still fulfill my role in this, where I'm trying to defeat Bledla so that the other side has a chance. Sequara has her conflict. She sees herself as a healer, but she has to use her power to kill, and that is not something she's comfortable with. So most of the characters have some kind of inner conflict here. Yeah.
For sure, and yeah, he forms a relationship with Sequara. Him and the boys are kind of getting on. He's starting to learn more about the way and how to use it. And again, we end up learning more about the magic that like. And again, we kind of talked about this, but is it like the elf shard like supersedes the way, or is it?
Yeah. I mean, look, I think
Cause like
my
there's that like blue pill or not blue pill. There's like that red pill moment where he's like, whoa, this
yeah.
was all a lie, or like, oh, they were or not really, it was all a lie, but it was more like, oh, they were thinking about it wrong.
Yeah, if you think of it in real world terms, the way I feel is that all religions are trying to tap into something, some common source. Let's say that they're like wells. It's a
Mm,
comparison I've heard before. They're like wells on the surface of the land, and they're all drilling down to find some aquifer beneath, right?
mm-hmm,
And it's the same aquifer, but they're just different wells.
mm-hmm,
So the way is one way of understanding divinity, let's say.
mm-hmm,
Whereas the dualistic religion of the Andumai, that's another way, or the polytheistic old beliefs of the people of the Mark, that's another way. So they're just these different ways of accessing the sacred, if you will.
mm-hmm,
And that's what Dayrhaven perceives is that, yeah, okay, Edan is essentially that same tapping into that same source as these other understandings of the sacred are.
Yeah, it's definitely, and he's basically trying to figure out how to use this power and how he's going to defeat Bloodla, because not only is Bloodla, um, with Bloodla, I'm not sure if he's a megalomaniac. I don't know if that's the right word.
I wouldn't call Bloodlet that. No.
Um, a religious fanatic for sure.
Yes, definitely that. Yes,
A
yes,
zealot on
yes.
another word.
Yep.
I don't know if he's a megalomaniac though,
I
but
don't think so personally, but
I'll put it this way: like, not only is he a madman, but he's a very powerful madman who
yeah,
has like
dangerous.
10 to 11 dragons on his side.
Yeah,
So,
12 actually, but yeah, yeah,
wait, what'd you say? Something
12,
actually? 12
12.
actually. Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Um, and he's like, well, how am I gonna defeat that? So he ends up
exactly.
going to another dragon,
Yeah,
and that dragon is mean. Like, she's just, kind of reminds me of D&D dragons, because like D&D dragons are pretty smart, and
yeah,
they also have very high opinions of themselves,
yeah.
and
So
like
there's a bit
humans
of
are a
smog.
disease.
Maybe there's a bit of smog there. There's a bit of the Volsung Saga dragon. If you've ever read the Volsung Saga,
I don't believe I
you
have.
okay?
Is that a
Well,
Norse
there's
saga?
it's a Norse saga myth type thing where you have an encounter between the hero Sigurd and the dragon Fafnir. And there's a similar kind of dialogue, and Tolkien actually knew it very well, and it's something that he was inspired by when he had Bilbo meet Smaug, really. But yeah, it's the Volsung saga, or the saga of the Volsungs, is the source. It's a very ancient Germanic legend.
Mm.
There are various versions of it, including the Nibelungenlied, which is in Middle High German. There's the Saga of the Volsungs, which I recommend. It's the Old Norse version of the tale.
Mm-hmm.
It's alluded to in Beowulf, so it's a very old story. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I didn't wanna go out and be like, oh, mate, were you influenced by? I mean, I knew you played it when you were younger, but
D&D, yeah, sure, yeah, no,
I'm sure you got the dragons from other sources.
yeah, yeah, no,
Like
I don't know. I
Smog.
wasn't,
I totally
I
forgot
wasn't
about Smaug.
consciously, I wasn't consciously thinking of D&D when I portrayed Gorsarhad, but I'm not going to deny that the D&D didn't play a role in my formation of dragons, though. Yeah,
Um, so so basically, Day Raven's like, oh, I'll do you one better. I'll get the biggest, baddest dragon. Take that.
that's right. That's right.
And he climbs up a mountain, nearly dies. Doesn't he
Yeah,
like? Doesn't he? If I remember, doesn't he pull off like a fingernail while he's on the mountain?
yeah. He rips off a fingernail. Yeah,
Oh, yeah, yeah. That was. Ugh.
yeah.
But
That wasn't. Yeah.
um,
Yeah, that's the ascension. Essentially, that's
yeah.
his achieving transcendence. It's a spiritual metaphor in a way, too, isn't it? Ascending the heights of the mountain, and then even going up in the air with the dragon. He's leaving behind the ego, leaving behind the self. Yeah,
Yeah, I mean, and he also lets go of the dragons after he's done with his work.
he he does the right thing. I think. Yeah,
Um, so which kind of I think I think there is still a part of him in there, even if there is even if
yeah.
he's more at more at peace with the elf shard.
Sure. Well, Dayraven understands something that Bloodlet doesn't, which is holding on to that much power could possibly corrupt him. And so he has the right instinct to let those dragons go. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it's one of those stories where it feels like the noose is tightening on our heroes,
Yep.
because Bledla has these dragon flying fire breathing WMDs carousing around the world.
True.
So
True.
yeah, it's very tense.
I hope so. Yeah, that's the goal
Oh,
for
I thought it
sure.
was tense. I was like,
Good. Good.
can you let him train real quick and then have the Dragon Ball power, power battle?
Yeah.
No,
You know,
unfortunately, no, it wouldn't be as good of a story if that were the case.
yeah, I hope
Also, I
that
don't think Bloodlove would be as good of a villain if he just sat around and let the hero, build himself up.
no, that would be very stupid. Yeah. But yeah, no, I hope that the Battle of Fuhan worked and that there was tension and that there was a good, effective, convincing build-up and resolution here. But that I also left enough loose threads at the end to say, yeah, to a reader, you need to go pick up book 3 and find out what happens. So yeah,
Yeah, and kind of going back to Bloodlust, I find it kind of interesting, even though I did kind of say, there was some of that complexity that I felt was a little lost, but I did think it was interesting how Bloodlust's zealotry proves to be his undoing, as
sure.
much as it drives him, which I
I think
guess is kind
his
of his
arrogance maybe
fate,
too.
his tragic flaw, if you will.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah. I would
I
accept
don't, I don't
that.
even know if it's hubris all that much as it is just just a genuine. Maybe it is a little hubristic as well, but I think it's just he genuinely thinks he's right, and
Well, and then because he's that convinced that he's right, he doesn't consider other perspectives, and he has these blind spots, doesn't he?
yeah, like
So,
he underestimates Erkenwald and
yep,
Yarowan, or at least I thought he did.
I would agree.
Because he's
Yeah,
all like that foolish boy. He wouldn't, he does his whole super villain monologue, as I like to say, where he's like that foolish boy. He doesn't know anything.
right, right, sure.
It's kind of it's kind of the his Glockta monologue.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
No, I'm kidding, but I think maybe let me backtrack. Maybe there is a little arrogance there. I think he does. He's all
yeah.
like, I don't think he thinks that Erkenwald could ever stand a chance to him.
I think you're right.
Which
Yeah,
which
he doesn't
he
consider the
makes the
possibility.
mistake. This is a guy who gets off on power, and you keep and you keep you know putting you keep trying to show how powerful and how much of a gigantic Johnson you have.
Right.
He's gonna bite back eventually, or at least
Well, that's the
he
thing.
never it
Both
never
Bloodlet,
it never comes to his mind he'll bite back eventually.
yeah. I mean, both Bloodlet and Erkenwald are using each other, and they
Mm-hmm.
both fully intend to ditch the other at the right moment. Erkenwald acts first only because Dayraven forces it by defeating Bledla. He gives, let's put it this way, he gives Erkenwald the opportunity to betray Bledla by disempowering Bledla in that moment. He's helpless because he can't access his power because Dayraven yanked it away there in that moment.
Yeah, I was gonna ask. So again, kind of going back to Avatar, funnily enough. So does he
Uh,
basically just like pull a Aang just takes the power from the Fire Lord, or is it just he
I'm
takes
not
the
sure because I don't know. I haven't seen that.
well, okay, does he
But
like? I'll put it this way: does he basically like take his power away like for good, or does he just take the
not for
dragons
good.
away?
No, that's a temporary.
Does he
Bloodla would
just
have,
does he
if he had
take?
survived,
Does
Bloodla
he?
would have gotten his power back.
Oh,
Yeah,
okay, okay.
yeah.
Because I know you said you hadn't watched which again, sorry, I kind of
I know
spoiled
what
what he
Avatar
does.
is, but I
I was
don't know
about to
it
say
well.
I kind of spoiled what happened at the end, so sorry about that. But
Hmm. Oh yeah,
um,
not. I don't really care myself, but yeah, maybe you want to warn your viewers there.
spoilers for Avatar: The Last Airbender. He takes the Fire Lord's power at the end of the series
Yeah.
instead of killing
Oops.
him.
Yeah.
But Dayraven does a similar thing where he's like, "I have the dragons now," and Bloodla's just kind of flailing. He's having what
Yeah.
TV
That's
tropes would
temporary
call,
though. In this story, it's a temporary
and
state.
Bloodla is having what TV tropes would call a villainous breakdown,
Yes. Yeah, that's
where he's basically like, "What? This cannot be," that kind of.
yeah, and complete with vomit and everything.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
He's basically just he's again whatever marbles he may have had, gone.
Yeah.
I
But
was
yeah,
kind of surprised just how like, what's the word? Like he just gets rid of him. He's just like, oh, it's Bloodla's fault. Eh. and
Yeah.
dies.
Well, he seizes an opportunity. I mean, he hadn't planned to do it that soon, but he just in the moment because he does make some pretty dumb, spontaneous decisions. You'll notice that come from again that ego. So Erkenwald kills his wife in a moment of fury, and essentially he's doing something similar when he kills Bloodlove. It's not really well thought out, and you're going
Sure,
to see
but like I
consequences.
said, he has a lack of foresight, that
Yeah,
Erkenwald.
yeah, yeah. That is for sure. But I'm being called for lunch, Britain. I'm sorry if you had a ton more questions,
Oh,
but if you have
sorry.
a
I don't mean
couple
to.
more just to end it with would be great, though.
I'll ask you one more question if that's okay.
Sure,
Or actually, I'll pull from a comment that I got on the last video. I thought we could talk
let's do
about
it.
briefly before I let you go. I was about to say I have class. I'm gonna leave for class in like 40 minutes, so that's okay.
Okay, cool.
Um, let me. Oh God, let me find it. Uh, I like to shout out T Baggins 96. He's a friend of the channel.
Oh, he's great. I
He
know.
commented, one thing I really appreciate about this book. He's talking about the Way of Edan.
Okay.
Is showing true, extreme, and all caps sincere religious zealotry. Something a lot of Westerners are not really exposed to in the forms that exist in some more devout regions of the world.
Yeah.
Self-flagellation, for example, would be
Yeah.
unheard of to many, but a sign of true piety or piety in some
Piety.
places.
Uh-huh.
I thought that was be an interesting thing to mention.
Yeah,
Um,
I think that he's right in the sense that there are parts of the world where you'll find that kind of piety more commonly than you do find in Western culture. I think it still exists in
mhm,
Western culture, not as much as it used to. So if you compare us to, yeah, medieval Christians, for example, in the West and in Europe, then yeah, that kind of piety was more common probably back then. Although you did have cynics and you had, people who didn't believe and you had atheists and you had agnostics back then. But I think that the Christianity was had a much more monolithic power over
mhm,
cultural consciousness back then, whereas today we're a much less religious society.
mhm,
And you will find places in the world though where religion's influence over a culture is still very pervasive.
mhm,
That doesn't actually necessarily always mean fanaticism, by the way.
mhm,
For example, I lived in South Asia, where in Nepal, which is predominantly Hindu, but also with a big dose of Buddhism.
mhm.
You find religion everywhere. It's all over the place. There are temples on every street in Kathmandu, and it's just part of it's the in the very air that people breathe over there. But you don't find fanaticism really much at all compared to in other places. It's a much let's say it's a more for the most part, I'm generalizing here, but it's
Mhm.
much more tolerant. Nepal is a much more tolerant place than probably most other places tend to be, but it's also a very religious place. So what I'm trying to say is being religious doesn't necessarily equal being intolerant or
No, of course.
yeah,
But I think it's kind of fascinating in the series, at least so far. How
yeah,
you like honestly depict people who are, you know, zealous in that
yeah.
way without,
I'm trying to. I'm trying to.
being super
Yeah,
like, oh, this is bad. Or, I mean, or
right.
try and be super didactic about it.
Yeah, no, there are people who are deeply religious and who do a lot of good in the world.
Mm-hmm.
So that's
And then
that's
there's
in there too. That's something.
and then there's the bloodlust of the world.
Yes, indeed, which is also historically accurate, in my
Mm-hmm.
opinion. Religion has been used as a club to beat people over the head with forever. So, yeah. Um,
Um. So yeah, some just kind of final thoughts. I will say the ending of this book here, I made me very excited for Return of Edan. So I'm hoping
good,
I
good.
could at least get Hyperion done before the end of this month, so I can get to it when September
Okay,
rolls around.
okay.
Um,
That's great.
but this was a really good book. There's a lot of interesting concepts and themes, and I know you've said before you're a big theme driven reader.
Yep.
So I think there's a lot of really good thematic depth here. Um,
Thank you. I appreciate you even reading it, Britton. And if any of it speaks to you at all, I'm really happy. So I really appreciate you reading it and inviting me onto your channel to discuss it. I really enjoy this kind of thing. So
Oh, I'm glad we could do this. You know, I actually made a video about Death of the Author not like last week, and
yeah, I'm
so
alive. I'm still alive
yeah, no, it's
for now.
yeah. But last thing I'll ask you before we leave, if you have any social media, anything like that, feel free to share, and we'll
Oh,
probably
sure.
wrap up here
Yeah,
because I don't
you'll
want to
find.
keep you from eating lunch. You
Oh,
gotta
thank
eat.
you. And yeah, I hope you'll have a great class. By
Thank
the
you.
way, yeah, it's I'm here on YouTube at Philip Chase or the Best of Fantasy, and I putter around over at Twitter where I'm Philip Chase 90 Philip Chase 90, and that's about it. Really, I'm not active anywhere else at the moment. So yeah.
Uh, yeah. I mean, you can find me on Twitter and well, it's called X now, but I still call it Twitter.
Oh yeah, X.
Uh,
Sorry. Yeah, whatever it is. Yeah.
you know, it's Instagram, and I have a lot of social media. So, yeah. Also, check out the Prophet of Edan. Read, kids, read the Way of Edan first, then read
Yeah,
Prophet of Edan, so you'll know what's going on.
that would be good. That's good
And
advice. Yeah.
then I will read Return to Edan. So,
Awesome.
yeah, there we
Thank
go.
you so
So,
much.
thank you for coming on and being giving with your time,
I,
Philip. It's always nice. It's always nice
I,
talking to you.
I appreciate you, man.
All right. Until next time. Signing off.